Mideast peace.
It's a great honor to have you.
Thank you.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets with President Trump at the White House. A look at the challenges they face.
Up, up with liberation, down, down with deportation.
Immigration reform. A deadline to decide the fate of dreamers is here. What will Congress do, and what do voters want? We discuss. Italian elections. A new movement overtakes traditional political parties in Italy. We have the latest. And honoring Our Lady. Pope Francis puts a new date on the Catholic calendar. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, March 5th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump says he is considering a visit to Israel in May for the opening of a new U.S. embassy in Jerusalem. He made the comment during a meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. White House correspondent Mark Irons joins us with more. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. The president upset the Arab world and allies last year by announcing the U.S. was moving its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. His critics say that ended all chances of a Middle East peace agreement, but now there are even more challenges to achieve what the president has called the ultimate deal.
It would be a great achievement, and even from a humanitarian standpoint, what better if we could make peace between Israel and the Palestinians? And I can tell you, we are working very hard on doing that.
Hoping for peace in the face of a potential roadblock. The point man for Mideast talks, the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is working with a downgraded White House security clearance. Critics say that will affect his work. Kushner's personal business dealings are also being scrutinized as the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election continues. The president blames his predecessor. In a tweet today, he says, "Why did the Obama administration start an investigation into the Trump campaign with zero proof of wrongdoing long before the election in November? Wanted to discredit so Crooked H would win. Unprecedented. Bigger than Watergate. Plus, Obama did nothing about Russian meddling."
Thank you for your tremendous friendship.
Benjamin Netanyahu is facing his own troubles back home. The prime minister is facing allegations of corruption. He says he's innocent.
Not even the attacks against me. And believe me, they are never ending. And therefore today isn't any different from any other days which I've been through in the past 20 years.
Today, Netanyahu thanked Trump for recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Mr. President, this will be remembered by our people throughout the ages. And as you just said, others talked about it. You did it.
But Palestinians are angered by that decision, and they say any Middle East peace proposal from the White House is dead on arrival. The president said he thinks the Palestinians are, quote, wanting to come back to the table very badly, but there seems to be no evidence for that claim. Still, the White House says it remains as committed today as it ever has been to the peace process. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. President Trump isn't backing down on his push to impose tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, despite critics from fellow Republicans. The president says he doesn't expect a trade war as a result of his push to crack down on steel imports. A spokeswoman for House Speaker Paul Ryan says the speaker was extremely worried and urged the White House not to advance the plan. Activists have ramped up their calls for gun reform since the Florida shooting, and lawmakers in both parties are working on different proposals. For more on the debate, we go to Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Jason?
Good evening, Wyatt. One of those bills is being sponsored by Representative Peter King, a Republican from New York who's also a Catholic. His bill would expand background checks for most gun sales, but Representative King tells me it will be a tough sell.
I'm not overly confident. On the other hand, the president did sort of shake things up last week in different directions, but at least the debate is out there now among Republicans, so we'll see where it goes. But I would hope that we make at least some progress on background checks.
In the Senate, Pat Toomey and Chris Coons introduced a bill that would require federal authorities alert state police when someone who isn't allowed to buy a gun tries to. The Pennsylvania Republican and Delaware Democrat call their proposal a common sense measure that also ensures Second Amendment rights. But Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the chamber won't be debating any gun bills this week. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is weighing in. They say they don't support arming teachers, but do support raising age limits for gun purchases and universal background checks. Wyatt?
Like you say, Jason, this argument seems far from over. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. Protesters gather in Washington on the day President Trump set to decide the fate of DACA, deferred action for childhood arrivals.
Undocumented community! Undocumented community! They are somebody! They are somebody!
Courts placed the president's order on hold. Congress still is trying to reach a deal with both parties on Dreamers, the roughly 700,000 immigrants brought to the country illegally as children. Alfonso Aguilar, president of the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles and the former chief of the U.S. Office of Citizenship, is here. Alfonso, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been 6 months since the president moved to end DACA. The March 5th deadline is here, and yet we've seen no action in Congress. Do you think a solution is in sight?
I think it's highly unlikely, unfortunately. Let me first say that the March 5th deadline really doesn't mean anything anymore. A couple of federal district courts, one in New York and California, blocked the administration from ending the program. And just last week, the Supreme Court decided not to weigh in on the case right now at this moment. So I think the Supreme Court will end up looking at the merits of DACA, but it will be by the summer of next year. So the political pressure is not there anymore to do something. So it's going to be difficult. I think Democrats are looking at the election. I don't think they have been honest brokers or they've been trying honestly to negotiate with Republicans. They fabricated all sorts of excuses not to get a deal with Republicans. All the Senate proposals collapsed in the Senate. In terms of Republicans, there is one last effort in the House, and that is to push the so-called Goodlatte bill, which would not provide a path to citizenship to those who benefited from DACA. It would give them legal status, a temporary status that could be renewed indefinitely. It wouldn't close the door to citizenship, but wouldn't give a special path to citizenship to the so-called Dreamers. They're trying to pass that without any Democratic votes. They need 218 Republican votes.
Which is going to be difficult.
Very difficult. Yeah. If they were able to pass it in the House, I think that would jumpstart the discussion, and then the White House could put pressure on the Senate.
You mentioned the Democrats and how this has been such a contentious issue for them. In particular, we know that Congress is supposed to pass another spending bill by March 23rd to keep the government running, and we remember the Democrats kind of forced a partial government shutdown over the issue of DACA. So do you think we're going to see another shutdown this month or in the coming months?
Well, I think politically the Democrats know that the American people don't want to see another shutdown. It really didn't help Democrats. I think they may try in the discussions of the omnibus spending bill that's going to be discussed at the end of March to include a standalone DREAM Act. I don't think that's going to happen. Frankly, at this point, I don't see any pressure or interest from the Democrats to get something done on DACA, which to me validates the point that I think they're using the issue politically and they really don't want a solution.
The U.S. bishops held a national call-in day for Congress to protect Dreamers. I know you're Catholic as well. How can we balance sort of our faith as well as the law on this issue, do you think?
Well, I think it's very important. I mean, as Catholics, I think we understand we have to be compassionate. We understand, respect the dignity of the human person. The Dreamers are people who entered here through no fault of their own. They're part of our community. I think we should provide them a path to legal status and eventual citizenship. At the same time, I think as responsible citizens that we're called to be as Catholics, we have to understand the need for law enforcement and for border security. I think we need to support policies that are welcoming of immigrants, but at the same time protect the security of the homeland.
That balance is so critical. Alfonso Aguilar, president of the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles and former chief of the U.S. Office of Citizenship. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thanks for having me.
A new national mental health and suicide prevention hotline could be in the works. Lawmakers are considering a bill to create a 3-digit suicide prevention line. It would replace the current number, which some say is hard to remember. That number is 1-800-273-TALK. Studies show when people use the hotline, the risk of suicide sharply drops. Envoys for South Korea's president meet with North Korean leaders in Pyongyang. Talks are expected to focus on how to ease a standoff over North Korea's nuclear ambitions and restart dialogue between Pyongyang and Washington. The South's delegation is led by their national security director. He is the highest-ranking official to visit the North in about a decade. Turkish police arrest 4 suspected terrorists as part of an investigation after a threat against the U.S. embassy. Today, security was tight outside the building in Ankara, and the embassy was closed. Late on Sunday, its website warned U.S. citizens in the country to avoid large crowds and to, quote, keep a low profile. Humanitarian aid makes into Syria. The UN says a convoy of 46 trucks is carrying food to civilians in the suburbs of Damascus. The Syrian army has been bombarding the area for months. More than 600 have been killed in the last 2 weeks alone. Italy is facing a political crisis after national elections failed to elect a party with a clear majority.
So this is indeed the greatest defeat of the Democratic Party in the last 20 years, and this is what will be the starting basis maybe for some new labor movements to take over.
Two populist groups came out on top, but neither gained enough support to govern alone. That means the parties will have to negotiate to form a government. One newspaper ran the headline, "Ungovernable Italy." Pope Francis meets with Europe's youngest political leader at the Vatican. 31-year-old Sebastian Kurz is Chancellor of Austria. He and the Holy Father discussed migration and nuclear disarmament. They also exchanged gifts. Cardinal George Pell appears in an Australian courtroom to face charges of sexual abuse. His accusers began testifying today through a video connection from an undisclosed location. Their testimony will continue for 2 weeks. The details of the charges have not been released. The 76-year-old Pell, the Vatican's finance minister, denies any wrongdoing. A male escort says he has identified 40 gay priests and seminarians in Italy. He names them in a 1,200-page dossier. The Archdiocese of Naples says it has sent that information to the Vatican. The escort is quoted as saying none of the 40 is accused of sex with minors. He adds the report is about sins, not crimes. Church prosecutors have indicted the former head of the Vatican Bank and his lawyer on embezzlement charges. They're being blamed for losses of more than $60 million. The Vatican wants to clean up the bank's reputation as a corrupt tax haven. The financial institution launched a massive overhaul as part of a process launched by Pope Benedict XVI. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us now from Rome for more on this. Juliet, can you tell us more about the charges?
Sure. So the case involves Angelo Caloia, who was president of the Vatican Bank between 1989 and 2009, and his attorney Gabriele Liuzzi. Now, the two are alleged to have sold Vatican-owned property to offshore companies below market prices and then to have resold them at market rates and to have pocketed the profits. Now, a criminal investigation was launched in 2014 when it was clear that there appeared to be irregularities in the Vatican Bank operations, and the trial is set to start on March the 15th.
I think it's interesting because many people may not even know about the Vatican Bank. Who uses the Vatican Bank and how is it used?
Exactly. So Vatican employees use the bank, nuncios, so those would be the representatives of the Holy See abroad, as well as ambassadors here in Rome to the Holy See, and members of religious organizations. Now, you have to know that this is a private bank situated inside the Vatican City. It was set up in 1942 by Pius XII, and it is run by a board which reports to a commission of cardinals and to the Pope.
Very interesting. Well, of course, as you know, these embezzlement charges, this indictment is just the latest step in the Vatican's financial reform. Can you update us on the progress so far, the big picture here?
So Pope Benedict launched the reform process in 2010 to clean up the image of the Vatican Bank as being sort of a murky offshore haven. Now, Pope Francis has continued these reforms, and today the Vatican Bank works under the oversight of a financial intelligence authority that's within the Vatican, which ensures conformation with anti-money laundering regulations and the financing of terrorism. Now, this road to reform has been a rocky one could say. Many top-ranking bank officials have come and gone, not all by their own volition. Now, most recently, Marianne Glendon, who is the former U.S. ambassador to the Holy See, she left her position, and that was just 2 weeks ago, Wyatt.
Well, as you know, as you say, it's been a rocky road, but obviously for a lot of people there and in the church, it's been a necessary road to try and reform all of this. So, Julia Idley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent, thanks so much for keeping us up to date.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Coming up, the Catholic Church celebrates a new school in Iraq. We'll take you there. About 2,000 people marched to the parliament in Athens. They're protesting new school books they claim threaten faith in Orthodox Christianity, Greece's official religion. The new textbooks devote more space to other religions and other Christian denominations than in the past. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Catholics in Pakistan are marking 7 years since Shahbaz Bhatti was assassinated outside his home in Islamabad. Bhatti was the Minister for Religious Minority Affairs, and he was Catholic. He launched a national campaign to promote harmony among religions in his country. Our next guest was a friend of his. Nina Shea, Director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. Thanks so much for coming back and being with us, Nina.
Thank you.
You know Shahbaz, and I want to ask you if you know the real reason why he was murdered and what life is like for Christians in Pakistan right now.
I knew Shahbaz, and I last saw him just a few weeks before he was murdered. Mm-hmm. He was murdered because he defended Christians and all other minorities against the blasphemy law in Pakistan. This is the law that calls for a death penalty if you insult the Islamic prophet of Muhammad, or death, life imprisonment, if you defile the Quran. So it's very harsh punishments. It's used to persecute minorities, particularly Christians and Ahmadis. And so he was defending a particular Catholic woman, mother of 5, Asia Bibi, and he was murdered for that.
And like you say, this is a problem when it comes to these blasphemy laws that's affected so many people, even Christians and their families, extended families as well. Shahbaz's brother met with Pope Francis in 2013 in Rome. Has the Vatican at all drawn attention to his case or to the plight of Christians in Pakistan in general?
Well, just last week, Pope Francis met with the family members of Asia Bibi, the woman he was defending. There is an effort by the family of Shahbaz Bhatti to have him canonized. And he really is a modern-day martyr. And when I met with him, he told me that he thought he would be murdered. He told me that the reason why he never married was because he did not want to leave a widow. And so he really knew the risk he was taking in speaking up for human rights and for religious freedom.
And of course, this is not just a problem in Pakistan. As you well know, all around the world, the problem of Christian persecution continues, and you've been covering this for decades. I know it's still so problematic, but have we at all seen any sort of uptick in terms of awareness? Do people now know about this?
Absolutely. I think the American people, according to recent polls of the Aid to the Church in Need, cited Pakistan as one of the world's worst persecutors. There's a law, the International Religious Freedom Law, that creates a list of the world's worst persecutors by the U.S. government. And Pakistan is not on the list, but the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, which is an independent government agency, has recommended that it be on that list, and I agree.
What do you think we can do about it as just ordinary citizens?
Well, I think that we can certainly pray for these Christians that are to this day being persecuted in places like Pakistan, horrifically persecuted. Asia Bibi is still in prison since 2009 in Pakistan for nothing, for basically a vendetta against her by other of her field workers. She was a field worker. So I think praying, becoming more aware, and then petitioning our elected officials to do something about it.
All very good ideas. Nina Shea, Director for the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike.
A Catholic leader in Iraq says a new school in his city of Erbil sends a message that Christians are there to stay.
So Mariamana School, it's another sign of hope, and it's another commitment from us that we would really, this is our response to the violence that we've been affected by ISIS and the persecution.
The school was financed by the Hungarian government, the Hungarian Catholic Church, and the Chaldean Catholic Church. It's managed by the church, but has Muslim students too. It costs about $1.4 million. Up next, we discuss how one archdiocese is helping married couples live out their vocation. And the start of a race where animals play a starring role. Pope Francis adds a celebration to the Catholic calendar honoring Mary. The Feast of Mary, Mother of the Church, will take place the Monday following Pentecost. This year it falls on May 21st. The Holy Father wants the devotion to encourage a growth of genuine Marian piety. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Cardinal Donald Wuerl of Washington, D.C. releases a plan aiming to implement Amoris Laetitia within his archdiocese. The papal document on marriage and family has been controversial since it was released 2 years ago. Some have interpreted parts of it as opening a door for divorced and remarried Catholics to receive communion. We're joined by Dr. Matthew Bunson, an EWTN senior contributor. Matthew, why is this pastoral plan by Cardinal Wuerl so significant? Has any other cardinals issued a similar document of their own?
Yeah, well, we've had a couple of significant guidelines issued, for example, by Archbishop Charles Chaput of Philadelphia. This is notable, however, because we have a cardinal in the church who's doing this. He's the shepherd of one of the most important of the dioceses, archdioceses in the United States, and he's a trusted advisor to Pope Francis, which makes him a rather prominent figure today. And I think this is a document, too, that may very well serve as a kind of template for a lot of bishops around the United States as they grapple themselves with the question of how to implement Amoris Laetitia.
There has been some controversy, of course, because some have interpreted parts of that Amoris Laetitia, opening a path for allowing communion for divorced and remarried Catholics, I mentioned. So how does Cardinal Wuerl address this issue?
Yeah, well, the Cardinal has lamented for a while the fact that there has been so much focus on just one particular aspect of Amoris Laetitia, in this case, Chapter 8, that some, as you note, interpret as a possibility of opening the door for communion for divorced and remarried Catholics.
Which is against church teaching.
Absolutely, yeah. And he, in a way, sidesteps the issue. He doesn't come at it directly. What he does, though, is two things. First, with an exclamation point, he has a subsection in this pastoral implementation plan, making very clear that church teaching is not changing. Okay. And then he stresses again the importance of objective moral truth and forming your conscience according to that. But then he also uses the important term, certainly in this pontificate, of accompaniment. That we have to, especially as pastors, accompany those in very difficult situations. And again, he looks at the totality of marriage. How do we accompany them to help them understand more properly how to form their consciences, again, according to the demands of objective moral truth?
That seems so significant because we're not rejecting married couples or people who were formerly married. It's guiding them towards the path to Christ.
Exactly.
So what practical guidelines does he inform families?
Yeah, well, if we're talking about the totality of marriage, one of the things that the Cardinal does is he looks at almost every aspect of how we go about as a church forming people to be married, to become married, to be engaged. So he looks at young people. Are we teaching them properly? Engaged couples, older couples, those, of course, who are in difficult and irregular situations, as he puts it. But he adds that caveat that all of us in our relationship with God are in some kind of an irregular relationships ourselves because of sin. But he stresses that the parish has to be the place for all of this to be really implemented fully and properly. But let's also make note of the fact that he keeps coming back to objective moral truth. He quotes Veritatis Splendor, the great encyclical of Pope John Paul II, almost as much as he does Amoris Laetitia.
How do you think this can be used by other bishops across the country? It seems like it kind of naturally applies to all Catholics, doesn't it?
It can, yeah. I think what the Cardinal's doing is telling his brother bishops that here's at least one plan for how we can implement this for my particular diocese, my flock, as their shepherd. Now, take what you find valuable in this and go from there.
Very good. Okay, well, we will be seeing and following how other bishops address this issue. Like I said, it's very important, and we appreciate your clarifying it. Matthew Bunson, EWTN senior contributor.
Great to be with you.
And finally tonight, a different breed of competition begins north of Anchorage, the famed Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race.
3, 2, 1, go! Yes, sir.
67 teams, each with one driver and at least a dozen dogs, travel over mountains and frozen rivers. It's expected to take 9 days. And good luck to all of them. I know it takes a lot of effort, a lot of work, and a lot of preparation. And with that, that wraps up our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.